Hello, Paul Pounds. Why isn't Gerald Suster huge? I don't get it. He should be. But first, before we get into that, let's have a word from today's sponsor.
I used to tease my dad about his dandruff, and then one day he turned around and told me I had dandruff. Well, I'm modelling, so, my hair has to look nice. So I tried other dandruff shampoos, and they just didn't work for me. So I tried Head and Shoulders, and it was incredible. It was really good. It cleared up completely, and I haven't used anything else since.
Most people find that Head and Shoulders clears the dandruff ordinary dandruff shampoos leave behind. Use it regularly.
It's really terrific.
So, how's the ad campaign going for our new Head and Shoulders? Yeah, we've got Kelly Lee Brock. Wow, she's like young and vivacious and dynamic. This is going to be one of our best ad campaigns ever. She could be all those things, yeah. To be fair, I think I'd probably be like that excited if I was talking about shampoo. I'm not the right person to talk about shampoo. I've just realised that. So, yeah, Gerald Suster. This is the incomplete Gerald Suster. I wanted to do a video about Gerald Suster because I am quite a fan. I think he was quite an amazing guy. I'll say now, I haven't got or read all his horror books. I have got The Force, which I haven't got round to reading yet. It's a bit of a chonker. And as I've said before on this channel, like one thing that takes up a lot of time is sitting and reading the books that I want to talk about. I haven't got Striker, which, see, it's a really odd one because I couldn't even find a photo of the cover online to even give you a vague idea what it's about. And I haven't got his last two books yet. They're on the way. So that's God Game from 1986 and The Labyrinth of Satan from 1997. But I've got and read enough of his books to develop quite a tremendous fondness for the chap and his writing. And I guess I could hang on till I've read The Force and picked up other things to complete my Gerald Suster collection. But I've kind of been reading a lot of his stuff or rereading a lot of his stuff lately, and I just want to talk about it while it's fresh in my head. So, Gerald Suster was quite a dude. He wrote a lot of fiction and non-fiction. And I'm not really going to go into his non-fiction in this video. It reflects... I'll touch on it briefly. It reflects his life. So he wrote a book about John Dee. He wrote a book about Alistair... We both wrote a couple of books about Crowley. He wrote a book about Israel Regardie, who who studied under Alistair Crowley. He wrote books about boxing. Suster was an amateur boxer in his younger days, and there's so many anecdotes about him still engaging in the pugilistic arts against rival occult scholars and theorists. There's a lot of anecdotes online where he kind of getting, if someone criticised him or wrote something that he didn't agree with, he gets stuck in the wood, lad. He also liked the whiskey and was fond of the Woodbines as well. A proper fighting, drinking, smoking, womanising bad lad, 100%. He also wrote books about the tarot and a couple about Hitler's occult dabblings. I don't know what the term would be for Hitler going off to try and find these occult artifacts, but he wrote books about that. While he was in the States, he met up with Israel Regardie and Gerald York, who both studied under Aleister Crowley, and Suster became friends with them and kind of studied under them as well, and became very adept in the whole Thelemic thing. And maybe I love Suster's work because of that. Some of the other authors I do like Machen, he was connected to the Golden Dawn. Erik Erikson, Jack Shackelford. When you read their books, it becomes apparent that this isn't a make-believe world for them. The world of, like, occult power. That's something that you feel like they were embroiled in. And Suster was. He was a famous occultist. And that's kind of what he's best known for nowadays, I think. When he died, a lot of his obituaries talked about, you know, infamous occultists who happened to just write some horror novels passes away. So his first novel was from 1979, The Devil's Maze. Focusing on, it's set in Victorian London, and it focuses on the sinister Dr. Lipsius and his gang of ne'er-do-wells who were on this like satanic blood quest that's going to end in human sacrifice, which is a cool premise just to start you off with. Chuck in this like eccentric gadabout town, Charles Renshaw, who kind of starts to uncover what's going on and decides it's up to him to put a stop to it all. And then you throw into the mix like the weird fiction of Septimus Keane. So this novel is a mad occult romp through Victorian London, but it's punctuated by stories within stories, which kind of works really, really well. Suster shied away from gratuitous sex and violence. There is some in some of his books, but The Devil's Maze is more it's like half pulp, half horror, all occult adventure. Now, there are obvious things in The Devil's Maze. One thing that pops up is Suster's love of like little pop culture references. So there's just little thrown in references to books of the Cthulhu mythos and stuff like that, which for me makes it really cool. It's almost like when you go see someone in concert and they go, "How are you doing, Bradford?" And you kind of go, "I'm in Bradford, that's going to make me cheer." And it's kind of the same reaction in me. Like, you know, I'll be sat reading a book and I'll go, "I know what that is, that's ace, that's a thing that I really like." As well, there's obvious similarities. The story in the story thing to Machen's The Three Impostors. And even in The Three Impostors, the section that's the history of the young man with spectacles, there is a Dr. Lipsius in that. And even in the end of The Devil's Maze, there's like a little epilogue where Suster talks about his passion for Machen. So that kind of you know, it's not like a thinly veiled pastiche, it's very definitely a homage. And the guy himself even sits there going, "This is my homage, and this is why." And it's just generally, it's nice and honest and open. But it's a corking start to his career as a novelist. Then, in 1980, The Elect was published. And this is the first suggestion that Suster just doesn't rehash the same idea. He throws all sorts of different stuff at you in his novels, and a lot of them are distinctly different from one another, and that for me is quite refreshing. As much as I love I will shut up about it at some point, but I love the Crab series by Guy N. Smith. It's just rehash after rehash, but if you like that thing, that's cool. But sometimes when someone comes along and you go, oh, I like one of their books, that's ace, and then they do something that's like, what is this? I didn't expect this. It's just kind of exciting. So with the Elect, it kind of kicks off with the new Pope, Pope Pius XIII, and his first public appearance. And he kind of steps out onto the balcony. Here I am, I'm the new Pope. I'm a bit of a lefty, I'm a bit liberal with my ideas about the Catholic Church, which won't go down very well. And he gets this chest pain and he starts kind of like, oh, that really hurts that. Oh, crikey. When he looks back up, he's got the face of Jesus Christ. Brilliant. And that sets in motion a whole crazy thing. I mean, the Elect is another fairly chunky one. And even with Suster's chunky books, he manages to keep the pace really well. I mean, the Elect is split down into like 6 short books with short chapters. So it doesn't feel like you're just ploughing through a hefty tome. It's like punchy plot development, and it works really well. So it's not a huge spoiler to say that the Elect is like a secret society. It kind of suggests that in the blurb. And for hundreds of years, they've been manipulating politics and religion for their own sinister and nefarious ends. Their symbol being an eye in a pyramid. So in the Elect, it's Edward Dashwood who is the hard-drinking, womanising hero, and he kind of continues to try and uncover what's going on, this sinister plot that's going to have us careering towards a one-world government and new world order. I don't want to get into the theories about that because there's a tremendous amount on YouTube about those chaps. So I'm just going to keep moving swiftly on. I think the Elect is the least favourite, my least favourite out of all Suster's books that I've read. And it feels like he was attempting to write a bestseller on a huge scale kind of thing. Something really epic and kind of carefully woven intrigue and things like that. And this is just personal. I've got a little bit of a short attention span for stuff like that. I kind of need like a monster or some devil worshippers or something to pop up fairly regularly just to kind of make my brain go, oh look, there's occult things going on. Here we go. Then in 1981 there was The Scar. Now The Scar is one of my favourite Suster books. I've got like a handful that I just couldn't pick from, and it's such a good book. So it's about a young lady essentially called Helen Trent, and after some satanic dabbling at a party with school friends, Helen Trent essentially becomes possessed by the soul of a vengeful witch who kind of gets revenge on men by making sure that everybody that dates the kind of, because of her age, slightly disturbingly promiscuous Helen, all those chaps meet a terrible end. Helen's teacher, who, by an odd coincidence, is researching the history of witchcraft, which I'm sure most teachers have got time to do, he realises what's going on and sets out to stop her. Now, there's something that in this book that's highlighted beautifully about Suster's work, and that's his references to pop culture. And with this, more importantly, is references to punk rock. Now, when somebody that isn't really into punk rock writes about punks or shows punks in movies or TV shows or anything like that, you get something like this.
Shut up! Anyway, where was I?
So the band in the ska is the Rejects, which is a fine name for a punk band. And the kids in the novel are kind of going, they are playing tonight and I want to go see them, but I was saving up to go see the Clash, but I'll go see the Rejects instead. And the gigs are right. Like, there is a Rejects gig, a load of skinheads turn up and it kicks off, and there's a massive scrap between the punks at the gig, the skins that have turned up, and then the bouncers wade in and get involved. And it's kind of like it's almost like, have you been there, Gerald? Were you at the front of punk gigs? It just works, and it's such a bugbear of mine that popular culture, you can like always tell when somebody that doesn't know about punk and isn't into punk in any way writes about punks, because that's what you get. Even though Suster did shy away a little bit from the kind of Sean Hudson-like, even Guyan Smith intense gore, I think Scar is his most gory. He kind of saves it, and this is something that we'll come back to in like that he demonstrates in his writing in the future, that you don't get splashed in the face by the gore. So when it does pop up in his novels, it seems to have more impact, because it's not just a gore fest from the first page. Then 1982 saw the release of The Offering, which was the first Gerald Suster novel I read, and I thought, given the cover, it was going to be quite different from what I actually got. But as soon as I got my head round his style and how he tells stories, I absolutely fell in love with it. So things aren't going well for Richard Layton. He's in publishing, and financial issues means that him and his missus, Carol, have to sell up their swanky London pad and move to like a sleepy little coastal town where they buy a house called The Offering. You're just asking for it, aren't you? Oh yeah, this looks like a nice, innocent, lovely house. It's called The Offering. So it becomes apparent that there's more going on in this sleepy little coastal town than we first thought, although we figured there'd be something going down. And the previous owner of the house was a chap called Kevin Street, who was a rock star. And that's another nice thing that Suster does. He gets these pop culture references. So so Kevin Street is a bit of a misogynistic, punky, angry, unpleasant type of character, and Richard in the novel becomes obsessed with Street's albums. But just to call him Kevin Street, it works because it's believable. Whereas if somebody wasn't into that kind of music and wanted something that had an impact, they'd call them like Scum and the Hell Bastards or something. You know, something that doesn't even kind of figure in that style of music. But it really works, and Gerald Suster writes his musical plot devices with just like a convincing realism. It's brilliant and refreshing. So Richard gets more and more into Kevin Street's music, and Carol, his wife, almost starts drifting into this uber conservative type role, and it's really interesting and genuinely well written. I don't want to give out, again, I'm trying to talk about these books without spoilers, but a little bit of a spoiler, the razor on the cover does feature in the book towards the end, when it's introduced to a particular aspect of a gentleman that's exclusive to gentlemen. Lars von Trier's Antichrist. Yeah. But Suster doesn't dwell on the gore and violence that he could do. So when there's violence at the end, it seems to have more of an impact. It's almost like teasing and titillation. You know it's coming. You know there's something harsh coming at the end. And when violent situations earlier on in the book are either avoided or not described in great detail, when it does happen, it is like it hits you and it's more like Jesus. So then, the year after that, 1983, Gerald Suster released The Block, which is brilliant. Oh, it's so good. But before we start talking about The Block, one thing that should be included in all your land registry checks and that, you know, when you're buying a house and they look for like subsidence and rising damp and Death Watch Beetle and all that, goddamn curses on just double check what happened on that ground before you start building stuff on it. And if there's some like ancient horrors that happen there, just nick off down the road. Don't buy that bit of land or that house. Just go somewhere else. Let's start a campaign, like one of them things on YouTube where people are always wanting me to sign petitions to, I don't know, all sorts, to like have that included. You know, when you buy a house and they're checking everything, just check for curses and shit. It's basic like horror survival skills, people. So in The Block, it's kind of odd because we get a character list at the start, and you do kind of need it. I did keep referring back to it, kind of going, who's that? That's them. Cool, I get it now. Because there's a lot of there's a lot of people living in this large block. They pop up in the story, and then a lot of them die horribly. So basically, the block has issues. Ancient, terrifying cults from the dawn of time right through to mad Nazi sympathisers that have committed unspeakable crimes. There's a whole plethora of bad juju going down in the block. But it's like the last kind of half to a third of the book. That's where it really kicks off. I mean, it romps along and you know there's some shit going on and it's all going to kick off at some point. And when it kicks off, boy, does it kick off. It's just like a survival horror thing, as half the block is possessed and insane and half the block led by, who is it? Tom Bradley, this kind of rugged, drinking, smoking dude, Gerald Suster again. He leads the attack to try and save everybody, and he's just like trapped in a building with a load of crazy possessed people. There's a load of survivors, and boom, there's just a massive fight, and it's brilliant. Again, Suster doesn't dwell on the gore. There is gore and violence and like We all want to read that kind of nonsense, don't we? I mean, let's just admit it. We read horror books a lot of the time for the crazy gore and all that. There isn't loads, but it feels like it doesn't need it. And when Suster does drop it in, like I've said before, it kind of smacks you up the chops because you're like, "Wey, that's a bit grim." So then we got The Force in 1984, which I've already mentioned. And then in 1985, we got The Handyman. Now, Gerald Suster, I said, he mixes things up. And from one book to the next, you really don't know what you're going to get. So The Handyman is about a chap called Harry Parker, who's under the domineering thumb of his ultra-conservative and outstandingly potty mother. I don't think Gerald Suster liked the Tories. You get that feeling in some of his books. So if that's a trigger for you and that's going to upset you, you've just been warned. Harry is a simple guy. Maybe a bit too simple. But he's got very good taste in comics and sleazy paperback novels. And then Suster throws in the horrible and disturbing murder of a child, which gets parents of the area more and more worried and thinking that they can't leave the kids on their own anymore. They need a babysitter. Now, growing up around that time, that was a thing, and it wasn't any kind of parental neglect. They'd lock you in, make sure you had some snacks, and Mum and Dad would go to the pub, and they'd be back at 10:30, having had a nice evening without you. It happened. So, the parents in question are Bob and Julie Foster. And they'd employed Harry as a handyman. And he was good at a bit of DIY, bit of fixing stuff. He was a decent handyman. Bob doesn't like him, but Julie quite likes him, and they need a babysitter, and Michael, their son, likes him. So it kind of works out. Now, when old Mama Parker kicks the bucket, Harry's left with nowhere to live, and Julie Foster invites him in as like a lodger. Partly because she feels sorry for him, and partly because I think she wanted to annoy Bob, who really doesn't like Harry. And this is where the book gets really interesting. Bob's quite a proud chap, and he's lost his job. And part of the book is Bob's descent into depression, where he obviously really hates himself, but takes it out on Harry. Like, is almost abusive to Harry. Now, Harry's mum, very obviously, as it unfolds, was abusive to Harry, and she was mad and horrible. And Harry has issues with, like, family matriarchs. And so there's no occult, there's no adventure, there's no sinister secret societies, there's no devil worshippers. It's just this weird, claustrophobic, psychological, unpleasant novel that's genuinely for my personal taste, I think it's genuinely brilliant. You get this like weird, not a juxtaposition because everybody's kind of going through the same thing, but Bob's unravelling. Bob's totally unravelling, but so is Harry. But Bob's unravelling in an insular way where he wants to destroy himself, and Harry's unravelling in like a totally mad psychosexual way where he wants to destroy pretty much everybody else. It is so good, and I was so surprised at the departure from kind of what Suster's already written about and talked about. It really just kind of blew me away. So then, obviously, like I said, I haven't got the God Game and I haven't got Labyrinth of Satan yet. I actually ordered them a few days ago. Copies popped up that were very affordable and they haven't arrived yet. But, like I said earlier on, I didn't want to kind of wait for them to arrive, read The Force, read those two, and then do this video. And hopefully I've given you a flavour of what Suster's about. So in February 2001, aged 47, the lifestyle caught up with Gerald Suster and he passed away, unfortunately. I still think there must have been some more horror books in his brain. It started to move away from writing novels. That had kind of dried up, and he was more interested in factual books. His last book was about kind of satanic priests called the Hellfire Friars. But he was a hell of a guy. He like lived one way and lived what he preached, and along the way wrote some really interesting and very clever factual books, but he wrote some bloody corking horror books. And the good thing is, right now, a lot of Suster books aren't that expensive. You can pick them up. Second hand, they're fairly cheap. He's kind of like a weird, unknown thing. And his books are so enjoyable and so much fun. I don't quite understand why. I've not been able to answer that question. So thank you for watching, guys. And I will see you lovely folks in the next video.